Exile, 1930 to 1934. On the morning of 5 June 1929, Mr. Ramsay MacDonald kissed hands as Prime Minister. Thus, King George V received his second Labour government, with Mr. Wedgwood Ben as Secretary of State for India. Indian nationalists were greatly encouraged 11 months before, Mr. MacDonald had said. I hope that within a period of months rather than years there may be a new dominion added to the commonwealth of our nations, a dominion of another race, a dominion that will find self respect as an equal within this commonwealth. I refer to India. Muhammad Ali Jinnah wrote to Mr. MacDonald on 19 June, damning the Simon Commission and informing him that India had lost her faith in the word of Great Britain. He then suggested a solution which would most probably be acceptable, that His Majesty's government should invite representatives of India who would be in a position to deliver the goods to sit in conference with them with a view to reaching a solution which might carry, to use the words of the Viceroy, the willing assent of the political India. Jinnah claimed that such an invitation coming directly from the Prime Minister would be irresistible. On 16 October, Sir John Simon, still in the throes of preparing his report, made a similar suggestion to the Prime Minister. He wrote, it seems to us that what would be required would be the setting up of some sort of conference in which His Majesty's government would meet both representatives of British India and representatives of the states for the purpose of seeking the greatest measure of agreement for the final proposals which it would later be the duty of His Majesty's government to submit to Parliament. These representations led to the first Roundtable Conference in London, which was opened by the King in St. James's Palace on 12 November 1930. Muhammad Ali Jinnah was one of the 58 delegates from British India. The first sessions lasted through December and into January, and the conclusions were encouraging future development was to be on a federal basis. Certain safeguards regarding defense and financial stability were still to be controlled by the British, but otherwise, full responsibility for government was to be in Indian hands. In the later conferences, Jinnah was to be overshadowed by the Aga Khan, a leader of the Muslim delegation, and by Gandhi. The Mahatma had refused to attend the first conference, but he became a dominant figure when the delegates met again in September 1931. It is interesting to compare the two men at this time. Jinnah, disillusioned and silent, walking over Hampstead Heath, in search of a house in which he could live as an English gentleman, retired from the fury of Indian politics, and Gandhi, the seditious fakir, as Sir Winston Churchill once called him, assuming the language of a constitutional politician and saying to the Viceroy in March 1931, I want to see India established in her own self respect and in the respect of the world. I therefore want to see India able to discuss with Great Britain on terms of equality. I know perfectly well that we want British help in many things for a long time yet. Lord Irwin was impressed. He wrote of this interview to the king. I believe it, sir, to be definitely untrue to suggest that he is out to break the unity of your Majesty's empire. The second Roundtable Conference failed. The harmony in which the delegates had met in 1930 was shattered in 1931. The rival leaders were merely transplanted their fierce domestic squabbles from India to London, and they stirred up unreasonable scenes whenever the communal problem was discussed. The closing sessions met in an atmosphere of suspicion and contempt. The suspicion of the Indians for each other, and their common contempt for Britain. The conference ended with a rebuke from Mr. Ramsay MacDonald. He said, we shall soon find that our endeavours to proceed with our plans are held up. Indeed, they have been held up already. If you cannot present us with a settlement acceptable to all parties as the foundations upon which to build, in that event, His Majesty's government would be compelled to apply a provisional scheme, for they are determined that even this disability shall not be permitted to be a bar to progress. The delegates went home with their angers, leaving the British government to apply their own provisional scheme for communal representation, later included in the Government of India Act of 1935. One of the delegates to the Roundtable conferences was Sir Muhammad Iqbal, the greatest Muslim philosopher and poet of his time. Iqbal, who was born in 1876, had been educated in Lahore, Cambridge, and Munich. His politics had grown out of scholarship and a deep sense of history. He was a philosopher, never a fanatic, and his influence over the fortunes of the Muslim people and on Muhammad Ali Jinnah was profound and enduring. Iqbal had already studied the miserable dilemma of the Muslims in India, and he had dismissed as impossible the unity that Jinnah had believed in and argued for during more than 20 years. He said, in 1930, to base a constitution on the conception of a homogeneous India or to apply to India the principles dictated by British democratic sentiments is unwittingly to prepare her for a civil war. Iqbal advocated partition. He even demanded and defined the frontiers of a proposed consolidated Muslim state, which he believed would be in the best interest of India and Islam. He said, I would like to see the Punjab, the northwest frontier province, Sindh, and consolidated northwest Indian Muslim states appears to me to be the final destiny of the Muslims, at least of northwest India. Jinnah met Sir Muhammad Iqbal many times in London, and they were good friends. But despite his disillusionment, Jinnah did not yield to Iqbal's arguments. Almost a decade was to pass before he admitted that he had finally been led to Iqbal's conclusions as a result of careful examinations and study of the constitutional problems facing India. It seems that by the end of the second roundtable conference, Jinnah had retired into a state of stubbornness and eclipse. He had made no important speeches during either of the first two sessions, and he was not included in the third conference because he was not thought to represent any considerable school of opinion in India. He stayed in England, haunted by the memory of his unfortunate marriage and discouraged as a politician. All that remained to him out of this disorder was his talent as an advocate. Abandoning all other interests, he decided to make his home in London and to practice at the Privy Council Bar. There are vague claims in newspapers and in contemporary reminiscences published in India that Jinnah wished to become a Labour member of the House of Commons so that he could fight India's battles in Westminster as Dadabhai Nauroji had fought them 39 years before. At the time of his death in 1948, the Sunday Chronicle recalled that Jinnah had addressed the selections committee of the Yorkshire Divisional Labour Party but was turned down because of his immaculate dress. We don't want a toff like that, one of the Labour men remarked. There is no proof in any letters, nor any record in the archives of the Trades Union Congress to support this story, nor did Jinnah ever refer to such a wish in his subsequent speeches. There is only a report in the Yorkshire Post of 18 April 1932 of a speech which he made to the members of the Leeds Luncheon Club, to whom he said, if the British government wishes to bring peace and goodwill in India, its best policy would be to introduce at once a bill giving India self government and to leave out the idea of a federation of all India. The federation is a good illusion, a mirage to my mind. Jinnah gave his own reasons for remaining in England. In a speech to the students of Aligarh in 1938, when he had again settled in India, he said, I received the shock of my life at the meetings of the Round Table Conference. In the face of danger, the Hindu sentiment, the Hindu mind, the Hindu attitude led me to the conclusion that there was no hope of unity. I felt very pessimistic about my country. The position was most unfortunate. The Mussalmans were like dwellers in no man's land. They were led by either the flunkies of the British government or the camp followers of the Congress. Whenever attempts were made to organize the Muslims, Toadies and flunkies on the other one hand and traitors in the Congress camp on the other frustrated the efforts. I began to feel that neither could I help India nor change the Hindu mentality, nor could I make the Muslims realize the precarious position. I felt so disappointed and so depressed that I decided to settle down in London. Not that I did not love India, but I felt so utterly helpless. It was in this state of mind that Jinnah began his exile in England. One day in June 1931, when Jinnah was walking in Hampstead, he paused before Heath House in West Heath Road. It was a three-storied villa, built in the confused style of the 1880s, with many rooms and gables, and a tall tower which gave a splendid view over the surrounding country. There was a lodge, a drive, and 8 acres of garden and pasture leading down to Child's Hill. All are gone now, and 12 smaller modern houses occupy the once pretty Victorian pleasance. Nearby lives Lady Graham Wood, from whom Jinnah bought the house, and she remembers him on the day when he first called. As most charming, a great gentleman, most courteous. Jinnah accepted Lady Graham Wood's terms with grace. He asked her to recommend a school to which he could send his daughter, and he agreed to take over Bradbury. The chauffeur. All that he begged was that he might be allowed to move into the house as soon as possible. In September 1931, Jinnah took possession of West Heath House and he assumed the pattern of life that suited him. In place of Bombay, with the angers of his inheritance for ever pressing upon him, he was able to enjoy the precise, ordained habits of a London house. He breakfasted punctually, and at 9 o'clock, Bradbury was at the door with a car to drive him to his chambers in King's Bench Walk. There he built up his new career, with less fire of words and calmer address than during the early days in Bombay. In later years, Lord Jowett was to recall this period of Jinnah's practice at the bar. He wrote, "We all had a great admiration for his legal skill and the judgment with which he conducted his cases before the Privy Council. Jinnah's life was now dignified and secure. His fortune was growing and he could enjoy the pleasant luxuries he had learned to accept. Carefully chosen dinners at the Carlton Grill, and talks with calm, intelligent lawyers in the still security of their London clubs. Also, he enjoyed the constant companionship of his sister, Miss Fatima Jinnah, who had resigned from her work in Bombay to travel to England and be with her brother. From this time to his death, she abandoned all other interest to his care and his career. On Saturdays and Sundays, Jinnah liked to walk across Hampstead Heath to Kenwood, past Jack Straw's castle, the inn before which Karl Marx used to sit during the exile, drinking ginger beer with his children. Jinnah seemed to enjoy leisure for the first time in his life. The harmony of this high landscape, where constable trees still framed the distant view of St. Paul's and Keats' nightingale still sang. Within earshot of the Spaniards. These were Jinnah's years of order and contemplation, wedged in between the time of early struggle and the final storm of conquest. One morning in November 1932, Muhammad Ali Jinnah read a review of H. C. Armstrong Grey Wolf, an intimate study of a dictator, in the literary supplement of the Times. After breakfast, he walked past the pound and down the hill at Hampstead and bought a copy of the book. For 2 days, Jinnah was absorbed in the story of Kamal Ataturk. When he had finished, he handed the book to his daughter, then aged 13, and said, "Read this, my dear, it is good." For many days afterwards, he talked of Kemal Ataturk, so much that his daughter chaffed him and nicknamed him Grey Wolf. She was then on holidays from her English school, and their companionship had become a delight to both of them. She alone could tease her father, a fond treatment he had lacked all his life. She alone could extend her hand, slim and expressive as his, and cajole him into putting a brief aside with the plea, "Come on, Grey Wolf, take me to a pantomime. After all, I am on my holidays." It is interesting to read the story of Kemal Ataturk again and imagine the influence the book must have had on Muhammad Ali Jinnah's mind. Like Grey Wolf, Jinnah was to create a nation out of a perplexed multitude of Muslim people, but in character, one a libertine and the other a Puritan. They were as different as any two men could be. Mustafa Kamal was born in 1881, so he was more or less Jinnah's contemporary. His mother also had lived in Porda and had been quite uneducated and ignorant of all the ordinary affairs of the outside world. Jinnah might have recognized himself in the description of Mustafa Kamal as an abnormally self sufficient boy who rarely made friends with other children. He might also have comprehended the protest Mustafa Kamal made to his companions at school. "I don't mean to be like the rest of you, I mean to be somebody." Other cries from the rebellious young Turk, indignant under the iniquities of Abdul Hamid, find echoes in the development of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, equally indignant under the apparent harshness of British rule in India. We read in Grey Wolf, all the young men cried out for reform, and of Mustafa Kamal seeing himself always the center, the leader, the ruler obeyed and respected by all. Jinnah also had been a brilliant, difficult youth, with whom it was impossible to be intimate. But there, the personal parallels end. There could be no recognition between Mustafa Kamal at 20 plunging wildly into the unclean life of the great metropolis of Constantinople and the immaculate Jinnah, who at the same age had played a game of forfeits with some English friends and refused to pay his forfeit. A kiss for one of the girls in the party because he thought it wrong to kiss a woman unless he was in love with her. Jinnah read of Mustafa Kamal in the full floodlight of his great prestige, high up alone on a pinnacle of greatness. It would not have occurred to him that he was to enjoy similar prestige and eminence, and achieve them, not by ordering 2,000 of his cavalry to advance towards the English line, but with the lone sword of his own argument over a conference table. There are passages in Grey Wolf that must have recalled Jinnah from the safe habits of his exile, back to the passions of Indian politics. Back to his cause, he read of Mustafa Kamal. Now he repeated publicly the terms on which Turkey would make peace. Turkey must be an independent sovereign state within its own frontiers and free from all foreign interference. Then the broader vision. I am neither a believer in a league of all the nations of Islam, nor even in a league of the Turkish peoples. Each of us has the right to hold to his ideals, but the government must be stable, with a fixed policy grounded on facts, and with one view and one view alone to safeguard the life and the independence of the nation within its national frontiers. Neither sentiment nor illusion must influence our policy. Away with dreams and shadows. They have cost us dear in the past. Jinnah might have read this important statement a second time and repeated aloud, away with dreams and shadows. They have cost us dear in the past. He was himself coming to the end of a dream. The illusion of peace in Hampstead was not to last much longer. One evening in July 1933, Liaquat Ali Khan and his wife arrived at West Heath House and begged Jinnah to return to India. Nawabzada Liaquat Ali Khan, born in 1896, was Jinnah's junior by 20 years. His education had been broader and richer. He had graduated from Aligarh in 1918 and had then gone to Exeter College, Oxford, where his political ideas began to stir. He took part in undergraduate debates and was secretary of the Indian Majlis. He was called to the bar in the Inner Temple in 1922 and returned to India in the same year. But he did not practice the law. He became a politician immediately, and in 1926 he was elected to the Legislative Council of the United Provinces. Liaquat Ali Khan was the ally Jinnah needed. Jinnah's appeal had always been to the educated Indians. The phrase occurs often in his speeches. He described himself as a proletarian, but he had never made himself or his ideas known to the masses. It was part of Liaquat Ali Khan's talent that he could charm vast, illiterate audiences and that he was not over ambitious. In the years that followed, when Jinnah enjoyed his own omnipotence, Liaquat Ali Khan did not mind. Indeed, it was part of his nature that he enjoyed the subtle rewards of second place. He was to become the brilliant administrator, the builder of Jinnah's architectural design. Jinnah was to find in him the complement to his own talents. Together, they were to become inviolable because they formed one mind, and the trust between them remained absolute to the end. A great part of the fortunes of Pakistan were decided on the day in July 1933 when Liaquat Ali Khan crossed Hampstead Heath to talk to his exile leader. Begum Liaquat Ali Khan has spoken of the friendship between Muhammad Ali Jinnah and her husband, and of their meeting at Hampstead. They had known each other from 1928 at the Calcutta conference, where Jinnah was so humiliated. You will remember how he was cried down as not being in any sense an accepted leader of the Muslims. Liaquat was one of those who stood by him. He had always admired Jinnah and believed in him as much then as he did at the end. We were married early in 1933 and we decided to go to Europe for our honeymoon. You must remember the circumstances of Muslim politics at that time. The Muslim League was in a degraded state. The finances were being misused and the League had neither dignity nor power. The cause had gone downhill, seemingly beyond recall. Liaquat had the belief that Jinnah was the one man who could save the League and the Muslims. But Jinnah was in England. It was believed that he would never come back and that he was disgusted with his own people. Liaquat and I arrived in London and we met Jinnah at a reception. Liaquat immediately began his appeal to Jinnah to return. I remember him saying, "They need someone who is unpurchasable." It was a word my husband liked, and it was true. Jinnah was unpurchasable. He listened, but he did not answer at first. He talked of his life in England and of his contentment at Hampstead. But Liaquat was not to be denied. He said, "You must come back. The people need you. You alone can put new life into the league and save it." Jinnah suddenly said, "Well, come to dinner on Friday." So we drove to Hampstead. It was a lovely evening, and his big house with trees, apple trees, I seem to remember, and Miss Jinnah attending to all his comforts. I felt that nothing could move him out of that security. After dinner, Liaquat repeated his plea that the Muslims wanted Jinnah and needed him. I had hero worshipped Mr. Jinnah for a long time. I chirped in, "And I'll make the women work for you. I'll bring them back into the fold." He smiled at me and said, "You are young. You do not know the women. You do not know the world." But he listened to Liaquat, and in the end he said, "You go back and survey the situation. Test the feelings of all parts of the country. I trust your judgment. If you say come back, I'll give up my life here and return." Liaquat was a very happy man as we drove back to London. We sailed for India, and for some months my husband devoted every day to his journeys and his inquiries. You know, he was the most thorough man I have ever known. He amassed his evidence, talked to 100 people, and only when he was convinced, he wrote to Jinnah and said, "Come." Jinnah returned to India to prove to himself that he was needed. At first, he was reluctant. One evening at the Wellington Club in Bombay, he said to Diwan Chamanlal, "Politics, I am finished." Then, "But if you could only get 6 people like yourself to support me, I would come back." Diwan Chamanlal has told the story. I sent telegrams to 6 of the honest and stalwart ones asking him if they would support Jinnah if he returned. They all replied yes. He already had the wholehearted devotion of Liaquat Ali Khan to strengthen these encouraging signs. As you know, Jinnah returned to England again and gave up his practice before the Privy Council. He sold his house at Hampstead and he came home to Bombay. The house in Mount Pleasant Road was opened again and the reawakening of the Muslims began. Mr. T.W. Ramsay, who still practices at 10 Kings Beach Bench Walk, had been Jinnah's neighbor in chambers during the years in London. He had described their farewell. I remember the day when he came in and said he was returning home. Several other lawyers had their eye on his beautiful office furniture and they wished to buy it. There were some lovely mahogany pieces. One of my colleagues said to Jinnah that he would buy it all, but he answered, "It is yours. I don't care about these chattels. I am going on a grand mission to India."